This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited. Welcome to episode 6 of our monthly Root and Branch Association Lost Tribes Fellowship Seminars, hosted by Fellowship Chairman, Mr. Yair Davidiy, founder of Brit-Am and Hebrew Nations organizations, and one of the world's leading lost tribes researchers in our time. And there aren't that many people in that category. We want to welcome as panelists for discussion with Yair today, Mrs. Anita Robertson from
Aqaba, Jordan.
And Mrs. Sylvia Halpert from
Detroit area, Michigan.
And Mr. Steve Matthey from Los Angeles?
California, Southern California.
Right.
Near
And
Los
without-
Angeles, yes.
Without
Steve, that's
further
my
ado,
name displayed.
right, I see that.
Steve, did you know you have my name displayed on your picture?
Right, we'll change that in a minute. Without further ado, I hand over the mic to our host, Yair Davidiy. Yair, it's all yours.
Research the whereabouts of the Lost and Tribes. Where did the Lost and Tribes go? Where are they now? What are they doing? What will happen to them? How can we prove it? How do we know about it? But then the question comes up, why? What was the reason for it all? Why couldn't they have remained as they were? Why couldn't they remain? Why couldn't the Lost and Tribes have not remained with Judah, not have kept the Torah, not have been part of the Jewish people, the Jewish people part of them, not the two parts of Israel? Why couldn't they have not remained together in the same area in the land of Israel? Why did one half or more than one half, why did the greatest section of the Israelite nation have to get lost, lose consciousness of its awareness, be lost to the awareness of Judah, be lost to itself, and then have to, in the end times, have to come back, have to return? Was there a divine reason for this? Now, you can explain it according to Torah, according to the Bible. People sin, do something bad, and they get punished. So according to the simple flow of the Bible, the lost 10 tribes that were together in the land of Israel. First, Judah, there was a general sin at the time of Solomon that caused the two sections to divide, to split apart. King Solomon, in the time of King Solomon, it was decreed. And then later, because the lost 10 tribes went in the ways of the peoples around them and became virtually pagans, it was decreed that they should be exiled. And they were exiled and lost consciousness of their ancestry. But even so, there was a hidden purpose behind it, a hidden reason behind it. So as we were saying, we read in the Bible that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they were the forefathers of the Israelite nation. Abraham had been promised that he would be a very multifluous nation, with an extremely large number of people, as the sands of the seashore, as the stars in the sky, that he would be powerful and mighty over all of the earth, that all the people of the earth would be blessed in him, that he would do justice and judgment, and that was the reason he was receiving the blessings, that he would also be powerful and wealthy, that he would possess the gates of his enemies, so the gates of those who hate him, as promised to Rivka, to Rebecca. And these were the blessings that were given to the Israelite nation. And then afterwards you had these blessings here and there connected with keeping the commandments. But then after that you have the Akedah. You have the trial, the test that Abraham went through when he was asked to offer up his son Isaac on the altar, and he passed the test, he was prepared to do it, and consequently God blesses him. He says, "Binish badi," says Hashem, "in myself have I sworn," says the Lord. In other words, without condition, henceforth, at some stage, in some way or other, the commandments and the blessings had to be fulfilled. It had to go through, it had to come along. And so you had them. You had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. Israel had 12 sons. The 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. They went down into Egypt, where Joseph ruled over Egypt. At that time, when they came down into Egypt, Joseph was the virtual ruler of the land. He was the one who provided it with all of its needs. He supplied it. And in the beginning, the brothers, Joseph recognized his brothers, but he did not recognize them. And Joseph is a prototype of one aspect of lost 10 tribes in their stages of exile. At all events, they were there in the land of Egypt, and they were oppressed by the Egyptians after 400 years. They went out of Egypt under Moses, and they went through the wilderness, and they received the Torah. They were supposed to receive the Torah, to keep the Torah, and go on into the land of Canaan and to possess it and to divide it amongst the tribes. So in the meantime, you had the golden calf, the sin of the golden calf, Heta Egel, and after that you had the Meraglim, the spies, who also didn't want to go ahead and conquer the land. Of course, the whole people's a rebel. And then, so there were certain impediments caused by the people, caused by what was going on. But eventually they did get there. They got into the land. They conquered the land. They divided the land up between them. After a period of ups and downs, they eventually had a King Saul, the first king, then David, who established Jerusalem as the center of Israel. In the time of Solomon built the temple. Solomon built the temple, and Solomon had 1,000 women. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, according to the Bible. And it says in his towards the, and these women were from all of the nations around about, especially those nations who the Israelites had been previously commanded to wipe out or to drive out from the land. And he took women from all of them. And there's a list of these women. And then it says, in his old age, the women began to turn his heart so that he too began to worship idols, whether he literally did or only because he allowed these women to do. It was attributed to him as if he himself was guilty. As a question for the commentators discuss. At all events, it was considered as if he too was guilty of what had been done. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, he brings an idea, which apparently is also referred to elsewhere, that why did Solomon take these women? What did Solomon want all these women for? So it says that he converted them. It says that the idea is he converted them, and he wanted through these women to gain access to the nations of the world. The idea that Solomon, already in the time of Solomon, what we understand will be in the times of Messiah, was supposed to happen then. It was supposed to take place then. That Solomon, through his wisdom, through his teaching, through learning the Torah, and through the Israelites keeping the Torah, they would influence all the peoples of the earth. Also through trade, Solomon traded all the earth, and his power, Solomon was known as a powerful king throughout the earth. And Solomon, through a combination of diplomacy, of economic influence, of cultural influence, of spiritual example, we see how the Queen of Sheba came up. He would be able to influence all of the earth, all of mankind, to go in the right path. That was we could say that was the original plan. That was a master plan, how things were supposed to go. And Solomon, by taking these women, he intended to facilitate this by gaining access to the soul of the peoples whose women he had taken. But instead of he influencing them through the women, it went the other way, and the women influenced him. And because of that, it was decreed that the kingdom should be divided. And after that, the kingdom was divided, and Jeroboam, son of Nabat, Yeroboam ben Nabat, he became the king of the northern kingdom, is from the tribe of Ephraim. He set up golden calves, one in Bethel, one in Dan, and of course the Israelites to worship them. And then we're told in 2 Kings 17 in great detail how the Israelites went after all the gods of the peoples around them. They set up trees, sacred groves, and they made sacrifices, and they did everything according to what the pagans around them had done. And because of that, they were exiled and were taken into exile. So this brings us to what exactly happened. As we said, there was a master plan that was supposed to do as things will be, God willing, in the time of the Messiah. Solomon was already supposed to put this into process. That was what's supposed to happen in the time of Solomon. But the Israelites were not built for it. They're not ready for it. And the world at that time, mankind at the time was not ready to receive it. And they weren't. It just wasn't there. It wasn't there at the time, and not everything was in place when they should have been in place, and not everyone played the role that they should have played. So we had, as if to say, using Tognan Magira, contingency plan, what they call a contingency plan, as if to say the Divine Providence had its contingency plan that the two halves of the Israelite nation would divide. There would be Judah on one hand, Judah would develop the Torah, keep the Torah, and whereas on the other hand, Joseph, that is the 10 tribes, would take the power aspects of Abraham. They would receive a good portion of the blessings. They would become a great and mighty nation that would influence all the peoples of the earth. Before then, in order to do that, in order to influence the peoples of the earth, they'd have to go down to the level of the Gentiles, to become like the Gentiles, to become barbarians, as the Gentiles of that period were, to think like them, to be like them, to evolve like them, but on the way to drag the peoples of the earth upward until they reach a certain level. And that is what the English and the Americans and the French and the Dutch, in effect, have done. You can say they did a lot of evil things. They were also selfish. They were selfish motivations. And they did a lot of things that can be criticized for, but on the whole, especially not compared to some absolute moral standard, such as someone sitting in a synagogue, judging against what the commandments, what should be done, what should not be done. In comparing one Gentile to another, they were much better than the others, and they elevated themselves over the course of time, and they elevated the others. They helped promote in the beginning, they helped promote the slave trade. Eventually, they were the ones who stopped the slave trade. The British stopped international trade in slaves. And then you had the American Civil War. It was the British who did that. And after that, the Americans and the Danish even helped them. Whereas in comparison, and still at that stage, most of the Russian people were serfs, were in serfdom, were virtually slaves themselves. And that wasn't that long ago. So it was thanks to these people that the world progressed and the world accepted different moral standards. And even though we have different moral standards, we have moral standards which are accepted, which enlightened people all over the earth strive to go after. And these moral standards are those of the West. And they might be very shallow. In some cases, they're very shallow. They're not held sincerely, but they are what exists. And they achieved a portion at least of what they were supposed to do. And so Judah too also evolved. And until Judah has begun to return and rebuild this land, taken over the political aspect for itself. And eventually the 10 tribes will also accept from Judah, or will need to go through a spiritual regeneration in order to supplement, complement, and bring to perfection the political and related concepts that they already have. So that's how we understand it. There's overall scenario, historical proofs, historical evidence. Also have additional sources that I can expand upon it in case anyone has any comments, any questions on this matter.
How is Judah at this point preparing to receive the tribes? Are they spiritually at the point where they would welcome the tribes?
Not really. There are this activity. There are people. There's quite a lot of interest in the 10 tribes. In our opinion, most of them looking for the 10 tribes in places where they are not to be found. But that is something else. But even so, most Jews, the same as people in America, they're not really interested in the subject. And if they are interested in the subject, they don't realize its true importance. But nevertheless, there is a feeling that something more. A general feeling that something more is needed. They need something. They have a feel that America, Britain, the West should be helping them. Should think along should think as they do, that they too should somehow or other be part of the superstructure or whatever is going on, and that the two aspects of existence, they also realize that there's certain different Jewish aspect of existence, and there's a Western aspect of existence, and the two aspects are similar to each other, and it would be advantageous if they would be able to interlock with each other. So that is a concept in some way or other that is generally accepted, but when to translate it into meaning that the 10 tribes have to know who they are, and the Judah and Joseph have to join together, that's something else altogether. They know very little about it. No one knows, apart from a select few, that is me, you, and a few others. There aren't that many who are conscious of this matter.
Right.
But it's there. It doesn't mean that just because not so many people know about it, it doesn't exist. It's there. It's provable. It's part of reality. It is almost scientific in the ability to predict certain evolvements that will take place if such and such a situation comes into force. I would like, maybe I'll say a few points about Rav Kook. Rabbi Abraham Cohen Kook was a very important rabbi. He was an important rabbi just before the foundation of the State of Israel. So Rabbi Kook said two things that help confirm a master plan. He said, but two of the things that help confirm this master plan is, one of the things he says that when the Jews in the Second Temple went into exile, they were forced to go into exile. They were forced to go into exile, and they fought against it. But nevertheless, Rabbi Kook said, some place psychologically there was a certain degree of hashlama, of acceptance, that this is what had to be done. That they realized that in order to evolve, to do what they have to do as Jews, they could not maintain a state of their own. They could not afford to go through the stages of barbarism, of cruelty, of primitive behavior that were needed at that time for a nation to evolve.
Okay.
They would have to be the guests of other people while they developed what they had to do, their national genius, one could say, through learning the Torah.
Right.
And he says that this would take place and they would continue to be in such a situation as guests of other nations, not have their own country, until the world would change, until the world will evolve, and it would be possible to keep the Torah, to learn the Torah, and also to have your own country without having to live to take primitive attitudes towards others, to do things that that are not acceptable to Torah existence. That is in rough terms what he said about that. So this helps shows us that this helps confirm that one aspect of our plan. The Judah from a sense could not go through that process. Judah had to be separated. Judah had to go into exile. And the question remains, if Judah had to go in exile, but someone else had to do it, because according to the blessings to Abraham, this is what had to be done. Abraham was given the blessings. Look at the blessings. It says, I'll make you a great and mighty nation. You'll be as numerous as the stars of the sky, and you will be a great and mighty nation.
Okay.
And in you, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. And that is why you'll be receiving these blessings. That's what God Almighty says to Abraham. Abraham would receive these blessings in order that he do justice and judgment and elevate the peoples of the earth.
So the 10 tribes.
But if Judah couldn't do it, if in order for Judah to do his own thing, he could not do that, then someone else had to. So who's the logical aspect of Israel who would do it? The 10 tribes.
Right.
And also they're losing their identity. They are no longer responsible. The Bible says that in the Sefer Hosea, he says it, Sefer Hosea says it, and also it's confirmed in the Jewish in the Halakha, that the 10 tribes had the status of non-Jews. They were suspended. Their obligations to keep the Torah were to be suspended until the end times, until they return. They will be counted as Gentiles. They had to go down to the level of Gentiles. And that is what they did. And another thing we have that the Rav Kook said, which helps us, flesh this whole idea out, he says that Theodor Herzl, represents the Jew, the Mashiach ben Yosef. The Mashiach ben Yosef is the embodiment of the 10 tribes that we find in other sources, Malbim, and things that are part of the Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben Yosef will come and he will lead the 10 tribes when they return. And he will bring them back, help bring them back. And the Mashiach ben Yosef is an embodiment of the 10 tribes and represents them. An aspect of the Mashiach ben Yosef that Herzl had, according to Rav Kook, but also is applicable to our case. So the Mashiach ben Yosef represents Joseph, just like Joseph went into captivity. Joseph became like an Egyptian. His brothers didn't recognize him. But nevertheless, from this aspect of being hidden, being captive amongst the peoples of the nations, he was able to reform the Egyptians from within. So too Mashiach ben Yosef represents a Jew who assimilates, who loses his identity, but nevertheless reforms the Gentiles, other nations from within. And so too, the lost 10 tribes, they did it. Wasn't just an individual, whole national groups became like the Gentiles, went down to the level of the Gentiles, were worse than the Gentiles in some way. But they reformed themselves and in the process also reformed everyone else, or not necessarily, they didn't complete the mission, but they began, they set out on the pathway. They showed that it could be done. They revealed the light at the end of the tunnel for humanity. So this is what we have. This is how we see it.
So how do you see this connected to like America today and Britain today?
So maybe that both America and Britain, they had it could be that they're losing their chances. They help the state of Israel. They help the state of Israel set itself up on its feet. First, the British helped the state of Israel, and then it reneged somewhat on its obligations and tried to help the Arabs, and then the Jews had to fight. And we don't know how things turn out. And now, and since then, first the French helped, then the Americans helped, and then Americans for a long time were bankrolling Israel, and were protecting Israel, and helping Israel, were hand in hand with Israel. And a lot of Americans see this as something that America should do. It's an American thing. Even have that, especially amongst evangelists, they see this as something American that America should do, regardless of what the Jews are doing. They should help the state of Israel because that is what they are. This is the decent thing to do, the proper thing to do, and they instinctively believe in this. Also because of the Bible, and not only because of the Bible, because of their own innate instincts. Right. So we don't really see, whilst we're in the middle of what's going on, we don't always see the big picture. We don't know why things are. We can historic, also even the fiction between the British and the Jews at the beginning of the state of Israel, when they founded the state of Israel. Even that could be explained by historical precedents. You had the beginning and the foundation of America, the British colonies. They founded the American colonies. And then they had a quarrel. They had a quarrel with American colonies. Americans refused said no taxation without representation. That was an aspect of Manasseh, as we have explained elsewhere. The Brit-Am Manasseh means responsible representation. On the principle of Manasseh, they went to war. And the historians now, even American historians, they agree that objectively, the British were actually in the right. The Americans weren't expected to pay me such a large sums of money. They were relatively speaking, for what was accepted in those times, relatively minor sums. And the Americans indeed were receiving protection from the French and help in their development from the British. And so whatever the case is, they had their revolution. And it may be that they needed that revolution, because through the revolution, they were able to write the American Constitution, to formulate the Declaration of the Rights of Man, to build up an ethos and a mythos, a whole concept of political attitudes towards government, towards how people should behave, towards how one nation should behave towards the other, and a whole tradition of fighting against tyranny and so on that came about because of it. So too, the Jews received the state of Israel from the British. Last minute, the British tried to back out, so we had a little struggle. And maybe the Jews needed that. Didn't need was better than them having received it all as a gift from above, as if to say. They needed a little bit to make a little bit of effort to throw off the yoke of the benefactor, one could say, when the benefactor wasn't behaving as you should have done.
Thank you for giving us a good beginning of what needs to be done. As you say, and the information about the beginning of the whole 10-tribe issue in the latter days needs to go out. So I hear you setting the foundation for that we can build on in subsequent sessions as to how that message needs to be understood and what we can hang it on. One of the teaching principles is we gotta tell a student who doesn't know about a new idea, tell them about an old idea. So there are all kinds of biblical foundations to this, and in next sessions maybe we can cover that. You talk about that in your book Origin, the biblical foundations of this, and I suggest that we can talk about it. Maybe I can talk about it as well, and we can all chime in on that. What the biblical foundation, that's where everything starts in Bereshit, in Genesis, in the beginning. So I think that's a way we can go, and in fact we need to go, because there's a biblical understanding among the 10 tribes that is not among the Eastern peoples, and that's by God's design. The Almighty has made it so that the 10 tribes will have a biblical understanding among them, especially in the latter days. And it has worked out that from barbarism, they have gone into a direction where they have foundations in their governments that are biblical. Winston Churchill mentioned there's a great hand working here on us below. So we need to talk about that, what those foundations are, next time.
Unmute, right. Well, I guess I'll have to beg to our viewers and listeners. We would usually have our program. We started a little bit late until we got things operational technically, and now we have to conclude the program. So we'll see you all in 4 weeks, which will be after Passover.